the Measure Z/O Committee. If you join me in the salute to the flag.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everyone received an agenda via their email, both personal and the Gmail accounts. Any modification requests to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. This would be the public comment period. This would be for members of the public who wish to comment on an item that is not on the agenda. Does anyone want to take an opportunity to speak to us on an item not on the agenda?
I would. I can speak, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, that's not on. Where's my little button? Okay, so I've thought a lot about this, and I made this recommendation last year, and it kind of died on the vine, but I think I can explain it a little bit better. I think with the amount of money that is squishing down, and we talked about this at the very end, we don't have a lot of money to give, and each year it's going to be less because of salaries, that the public in general kind of has a right to, I think, be able to access some of that money, even if they're not one of the agencies that applies through the regular procedure. And I would like to see us possibly write a letter to the board and introduce the thought that maybe they would keep out the first, say, $100,000, $200,000 before we were ever given the total amount that we have to give, and use that as grant money to expand the money by using that as seed money. And the agencies that would apply for that would have to meet the criteria for, for Measure Z or O. But they would, like, I wrote grants for 33 years for AARP nationally. And one of our biggest problems was always getting the matching money to get something started. So I'm just thinking, say we give $200,000 to that grant fund. It has to be spent during the year, and it would be up to the board to decide who got the money. But we could make I'm thinking we could probably make $750,000 out of $200,000, because if you get the seed money to apply for grants, then that brings a whole lot more money into the county. And you were saying you wish we could raise more money, to get more money for Measure Z, and I think this would be the ideal way to do that, because there's a lot of really smart people out there in the various agencies that are asking for money, but they don't get it, but they know where the money is, where they can apply for expansion. They can apply for seed money. They can apply for, a portion of their grant. And I think that if, that's the only way I can think of that we can build more money out of Measure Z and include more people that maybe just need a smaller amount to get their agency expanded to meet the criteria, again, of Measure Z. So it's not something that we would make the decision on, but maybe write a letter to them and see how they feel about, setting that money aside before we're given the money to say how much we get to, ask for.
Ginger, are you asked?
Excuse me, Ernie, just by way of protocol, since that was a public comment, I don't think we are normally entering into discussion of the suggestion of the commenter and so on. I would just note, however, that item 5 on our agenda today is very similar to the concept you're proposing, and since it was agendized, I'm sure we can address your concept at that point in time, if you don't mind. Okay. Next item would be an approval of the minutes of March 28th, 2019. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
I move to approve the minutes.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Any requests for alterations or additions? Okay, seeing none, we would please vote on the motion to accept the minutes of 3/28/2019. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Item 2 is an update.
Chair, I believe we need to take public comment on that before we move.
Oh, I'm sorry, I should. You're correct. Does anyone want to comment on the minutes of the 3/28/19 meeting? Seeing none, The motion carries. Next item would be a staff update on the actual expenditures and projected adopted budgets for 2019-2020.
Great, so you have a copy of this in your packets and also by the door for those who've come in, and we have it up on the board as well. So the 2018-19 actuals, we'd like you to please note that the auditor is still working to close the year, and due to changes in accounting practices, staff had made the best estimates possible, and these numbers are still subject to change. Fiscal year 2018-19 revenues came in at $10.8 million, which was $734,000 less than what was budgeted. Expenditures total $11.7 million, which is $2 million less than what was budgeted. However, $1.16 million of that will be requested as carry forward, leaving only $187,867 to allocate. Looking forward to the 2019-20 adopted budget, due to changes in year-end estimates developed through the budget process, the Board of Supervisors was asked to reduce your committee's recommendations by $395,631. And to give some context into what those are, we have included the final allocations in your packet as well, or the final selections by the board. So that will be what I'll go through next. The Board of so that's in the PDFs if you wanted to put that up there. The Board of Supervisors adopted the Measure Z allocations as recommended by your committee with the following modifications. The funding for CERT of $20,524 was not adopted as the sheriff absorbed that cost into their operations budget. The SRO for Eureka City Schools totaling $55,300 was not funded as the sheriff does not have a deputy available for those services. It was recommended that this position be evaluated at mid-year. The Humboldt County Fire Chiefs Association volunteered a reduction of $100,000. Public Works volunteered a reduction of $10,000 to the allocation for illegal dumping. These changes left an additional $209,807 in additional reductions still needed. In order to accommodate this, the following applications have been funded by the general fund. $26,816 for adult protective services, $57,208 for aviation airfield electrical system, $128,750 for DHHS MIST expansion. So, as I said, that's in your packet. All contracts have been sent out to the awarded agencies for review, and we're just waiting for those to be returned with signatures. Once we get those, we'll be presenting to the Board of Supervisors. At the same time, staff will bring a proposed carry-forward policy that allows the CAO to approve any carry-forward requests, and will evaluate the carry-forward request received thus far for the audit and the Fire Chiefs Association's projects. So that
Okay.
is the budget. Do you have any questions for me?
I'm going to say any questions or clarification requests from the board? Any public comment on the report by staff? Thank you for the information. It's probably a little bit premature, but you've probably gotten your second quarter revenue for the current year and have some sort of sense of if there's any kind of trending. Do you have any information in that regard?
Yes, I have been monitoring it. I monitor it very closely. Those revenues are incredibly important to the county. I would say that they appear to be on track. But the BOE has recently made some significant changes to how they allocate their funds. So it is difficult to make those projections with any real certainty because the true-ups and the future payments will be different than what we're used to seeing in the past. So I'm not concerned. I'm not optimistic. I think we're on track for the projections that staff have made.
Okay, thank you. Any other public questions in regard to the presentation regarding the allocations and projections in the future? Okay. Last chance, committee. Any comments, questions? Seeing none? Okay. Next, we go on to the 2021 application process and discuss the application itself and any process changes that the members of the committee feel would be appropriate.
Before we go on, we did have the salary calculations there. Did you want to discuss that before moving on to the next
Okay,
item?
I'd be happy to. For the public and the committee's information, I requested staff do a rather, overview of the fixed personnel costs that we have sustained in the fund for the last couple of years. That request was, came from concern on my part and actually a couple other committees' part and some community members that due to inflationary personnel costs, the personnel share of the allocation was constantly growing and eroding let's just call it the discretionary share of the committee's capability based on the fact that we had adopted at least an informal policy that we would continue to fund those personnel positions once they were approved so that you didn't have a yo-yo effect in the agencies of, hiring personnel and then not having a funding the next year. As you can see, the personnel costs are up to 78% of the overall funding at this point in time. And the concern that I had and what I wanted to bring to your attention for discussion was the fact that if you assume that there's a 4 to 5% increase on a yearly basis in your personnel costs through salary and retirement and other roll-ups and so on, in about 5.5 years, the salaries would likely be 95 to 100% of the fund's capability, and there would essentially be no longer any discretionary funding available. That concerns me, quite frankly, from a practical point of view and a public relations point of view. So I was hoping to just engender today kind of a general discussion and see if there's any interest in pursuing either policies or modifications to the way we try to fund these positions. We do have some limitations in the sense that if you were to propose, say that the committee, and I'm just using this as an example, were to propose 80% funding of the positions and so on, then you'd find yourself in a situation where the general fund or some other revenue source would have to fund the other 20%. And that would run contrary to the vast majority of the promises that were made when Measure Z was originally initiated. So the obvious solution would be to put some sort of a cap and force the agencies and or the county to complement the funding with some, other funding source. Like I said, I think that's kind of ethically challenging based on the promises that were made to the public initially. So I'm just trying to open a discussion basically at this point. I don't expect that we would reach any kind of conclusions, but I'm trying to measure the sense of the committee in the measure that, do you share that concern? And if so, do you have any ideas or approaches you think the committee could, address that sort of problem? And is it something we should, consider discussing in a more detailed and explicit way in future meetings, or am I being a chicken little, I guess?
I absolutely would like to follow through on this discussion. One of the things that I'm concerned about is I would really like to see a schedule of what positions are funded through this, the guaranteed positions. What we have is a breakdown of, for example, Sheriff's Department had $4,195,000 for salaries and employee benefits. But we don't know how many positions that really translates to. And I'm also curious about, with how many positions they're funding, I'm also curious about what unfilled positions are within each department that's receiving funding from us.
Outside of the Measure Z funds? Are you
Correct.
Total? I see.
And is that something that we can evaluate? Is that something that we can consider as a committee or in our process?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I can pull up the staffing allocations for our agencies if you give me a few moments, and you can see those right now on the spot. But I was concentrating on doing that and I missed what your question was.
I'm hoping to see a schedule of positions within each department that's receiving guaranteed funding. And I'd like that information included in the packet when we receive applications. I'd also like to know which agencies that are receiving guaranteed funding have unfilled positions and what the history of those unfilled positions look like. And I'm wondering if that's something that's appropriate for this committee.
Yeah, can I?
Yes,
Go ahead.
yes.
I'm trying to let go of my controlling ways and pass the buck over here, but I warned her beforehand, I'm gonna be like trying to, she might have to rein me back a little. We can provide you with the schedules. I can actually pull it up here if you want to follow through with your discussion, and I can let you know when I have that. It's easily attainable of all of the Measure Z budget units within the county that have positions allocated to them. We would have to communicate with the departments on what the vacancies look like in each of those budget units. I don't know that right off of my head. But my only caveat to that would be it would be a moment in time evaluation. And so it might just be that somebody has recently left a position. I don't know if it would necessarily reflect.
Right, and that's, I'm kind of wondering if there's a way that we can like take, say, 4 snapshots a year of that and to see if there's a trend with unfilled positions rather than just one snapshot at the application process.
Sure. And one way to also evaluate that is to compare budgeted salaries versus actuals, because that's going to give us an indicator of how much of the salaries that were allocated weren't used, and that would be indicative of vacancies and staffing turnovers as well. But we can certainly get some of that data for you, and we could bring it back. We can send it out to your committee by email, or we can bring it back at the next meeting.
I would love to have that schedule included with the application packets when we receive the application packets, as far as the rest of the applications, so we can easily refer, what's being funded with what's being asked for.
In terms of what the new applicants look like?
Yeah.
And how does that, what's the relationship of the new applications compared to history of funding?
I'm sorry. What I'm asking for is, so when we come to our next cycle, there will be a guaranteed funding portion that is set aside. I would like a schedule of those positions
Sure.
included with the application packets.
Okay. So as an example, the sheriff has 40 positions. You want to see how many positions, you want this as a data set just to
Right.
accompany it. The sheriff might not have an application
Right.
presented, but just as.
But I want there to be
data for you.
clarity about what positions are being funded, so that when we're looking at applications, we can know really where the money that's being allocated through the guaranteed positions is going.
Sure.
Other comments? Rich?
Thank you. As the committee may remember, this was one of my concerns last year, that I'm aware that as the tax money goes down, pretty soon, agreeing with what the chairman said, we could be fully funded without any money to implement anything new other than personnel. I have a question. What if we get into a recessionary time and the Z money really goes down and we don't have enough money to pay the personnel? How is that cut made?
That would be an executive level decision on how that cut would be made, but we would
Who's executive?
the county administrative
The
office
county
would make
administrative.
recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. Ultimately, it's the Board of Supervisors' discretion as to how cuts are made, but we certainly provide advice to them on what might be the best mechanism to addressing shortages. Cutting staffing would be a last case scenario. We don't ever want to find ourselves in a position where we're laying staff off, and in the last recession, we did not need to lay any staff off. We did offer incentive packages for early retirements and things of that sort. But eliminating staff would be our last option. We would first look at expenditures and overhead and see where we could cut some fat there before we addressed any staffing. And particularly for Measure Z, it's difficult to say, if we did have such a shortage that we had to dip into staff, if that would be something that would be absorbed by the general fund, or if we would address cuts. You know, there are other revenues for the county that could supplant shortages if it came down to reducing staffing levels. But that was, as Mr. Ziemer said, not the intention of Measure Z. It's always been that the general fund should not have to come in and replace revenues.
Thank you, Alicia. I understand what you're saying, but my question really focuses on with what Nicholas is saying. We have funded specific positions, and if we don't have the money, we're not talking about early retirement for the entire sheriff's department or fire department. I'm talking about that one specific position that we are funding. How do we cut that out?
If I might, I think in the past, the board, in my understanding of the process, is the applicants come forward with a very specific request to us that they're looking to fund a specific position and so on.
Right.
If they were to get to the point where, say, the sheriff's office, as an example, could only fund 35 of the 40 currently funded
Right.
positions, there is, I think, a fair ethical question in the sense that, is that an executive decision of the sheriff's office or the board of supervisors to say, okay, even though you allocated this money for correctional officers, we're going to, you know, allocate it in such a way that the patrol deputies, you know, are reduced and so on. There's kind of some ethical issues and political issues there that are probably above our pay grade, quite frankly, but they're ethical issues nonetheless. So I would think in that circumstance, in the case of the sheriff's office, the sheriff would come forward with a recommendation to the board of supervisors, and he would try to allocate the funding in the mechanism that he or she thought best for, you know, their particular agency, and then it would be determination of the board of supervisors whether they would allow that redirection, correct?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The department heads are definitely the subject matter experts as to their programs and the needs of those programs. And so our office and the board would be working closely with department heads on evaluating how we could make cuts while maintaining the integrity of programs in the most effective manner possible.
For the purposes of TV, my boss is asking that we turn on all the lights in the room.
Turn on?
Turn on, they're not all on.
Okay,
We'll get that. Thank you.
thank you.
I just think that's an interesting question, because reading through the Measure Z requests, that's exactly what we did. There was insufficient fund for the applications. Some of them were funded previously, and then when the projected revenue was seen to be lower than expected, the BOS reduced it even further and then funded it through the general fund. So I think that precedent has been set. I have similar concerns regarding future allocations. I think about the intent because having been in this position for a short time, the intent of Measure Z is constantly deliberated on. We see a summary of it put before us. And so for me, the intent is not to protect the general fund, it's to augment the services in the community that the general fund has been insufficient to provide. And looking forward, we need to somehow address that continual imbalance. For me, I resort to some simple options. One is that we limit or we cap the amount of allocations per department, per se, if we can do that within the fund. And the other thing is we return to what I read in the resolution of the essential services that are supposed to be provided through Measure Z. So specifically, additional funds to expand patrols, maintain 911 response times, and make sure calls about violent or property crimes are responded to promptly, to ensure there are sheriff's deputies on duty 24 hours a day, to fight drug-related crimes, eliminate meth labs, provide drug prevention and rehab services, do more to fight large-scale industrial marijuana farms, to the volunteer fire departments and firefighters to allow additional resources to better and more safely protect county residents, to restore services for child abuse and protect children that have been victims of these crimes, and then to deal with the $150 million backlog of road maintenance projects. So we can talk about,
Excuse me, Sean, I didn't hear that after the $150,000 backlog.
of road maintenance
Thank you.
projects. So I think if we
150
see-
million.
Yeah, if we see the continued trend that revenues are decreasing, costs are increasing, we can look to how to improve that. So leverage it through a grant process is one option. But then a lot of these services have no grant opportunities. So shouldn't we be providing as much of the Measure Z to them as possible? A lot of our applicants last year had several other funding options, and when they were denied, they went and found those, which speaks to that fact. So I would ask the committee to look to making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to saying we either cap it or we restrict it to these essential things, so that the burden on those decisions isn't put on the committee in a very compacted time, and then we have to make the ethical decisions that you're referring to, where it needs to be made at an executive level. If this is the intent, this is how the funding works, these are the limitations, so that the public and the administrators know the best way to use it, because how it's working now is, it's not going to be feasible in the future.
Other committee members, thoughts?
Only to say I agree very much with what you just said.
You know, yeah, I think it seems to me that there is consensus about a coming problem and so on. And the question, of course, is what you can do to address it. I have a question for staff in the sense that this is going to be a touchy ethical one for me and probably for everybody, but the promises, if you want to call them that were made about not supplanting general fund money to the county, do you think the public had the sense that that same promise was made to the outside agencies? And let me tell you where I'm going before you even consider answering the question. Just taking the outside city police forces as an example, there is a pretty significant discrepancy in the cost to employ an FTE between, say, Eureka's application and Fortuna's. That's what has puzzled me, especially just in this particular example, because right now the Fortuna officers are in a public relations campaign talking about how they're underpaid compared to their comparable agencies. But the fact of the matter is their application last year was the most expensive on a per capita basis of any of the agencies. So one of the things that comes to my mind is, would it be possible to establish, say, a local agency average and say that the committee would only fund a position up to that average amount, and the agency would be responsible for any costs above that average? Or would it be ethically possible to say, we're going to take the average and say, we will contribute at 90% of that average? What I'm trying to do, quite frankly, is cut some money, because if we were just to cap where we are, in 6 years, there essentially will be no discretionary money. So we have a relatively short timeline to try to deal with this. And like I said, I am fully sensitive to the ethical issues of treating in-house, i.e. county agencies, different than outside agencies. There's a whole bunch of political and practical pitfalls to that. It may be a matter of the committee, bringing this issue to the Board of Supervisors and pointing out to them that we're 5 to 6 years away from essentially not having any real function for the committee anymore, because you'll be out of discretionary money, and say, how do you feel about approaching the public and saying, when this measure was initially conceived, our understanding and hope was that we would never, in fact, supplant general fund monies, but the reality that we're facing is that unless we were to do that, the entire fund will become, personnel related with no discretionary capability for any of their entities. So I don't have answers to those questions, but they're questions that kind of help me, look at and evaluate what our options might be. Ginger?
So are you saying that you would like to see us ask the board to put the cap on it. We can't put the cap on anything. We're the advisors, right? We're not the deciders. We're the advisors. So anything like that would have to be put toward the board, and then before the applications came in, they can make that decision,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, I think it's a good idea maybe to have you go before the board and talk about this, because I think that, you know, I'm sure they all know it, but it would be good to get it out to the public. But we cannot make those policy decisions on this money. All we can do is recommend. And before we do it, we'd have to get their permission and have them decide what the cap would be.
Does the county ever have a structure where the board appoints like a subcommittee of the board to meet in a workshop setting with any of its standing committees to talk about issues like that? Does that structure exist as far as you know?
Yes, the board on occasion creates subcommittees and ad hoc committees depending on, you know, what the task is at hand. But as Ginger pointed out, your committee is an advisory committee, and so it is well within your purview if you wanted to establish a median salary contribution that would be appropriate for, say, the SROs that are allocated across the county, which I think is what you might be saying, so that each agency who is staffing an SRO get an equal contribution. And that could be a methodology that your committee uses in determining what your recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for each of those applications would look like.
I would like to say that I see the inequities. I see that Eureka's not getting nearly as much as Fortuna, but there is an economy of scale. The smaller police departments have more difficulty funding their departments than, say, a larger police department with more resources. And I think the economy of scale is reflected in the requests that they're asking for over and above what average police officers get. Like if Garberville had a police department, I doubt we could even fund one policeman. So it's I think the economy of scale has to be considered here. The smaller departments have greater needs.
Sir, just let me clarify. I was using the Eureka Fortuna example only as an example. I'm not trying to put, you know, value considerations on their applications or anything. It is interesting to me, like I said, given context and background information that seems to be inconsistent with the applications that we receive, but I use it only by way of example.
I think if we're going to talk about this in detail, we should just go ahead and, you know, say we're going to meet again, or that, you know, because we could talk about this all day into specifics. And so I think that if we're going to break this down, we should just kind of table it and decide to meet again with the board, or, you know, approach the board and talk to them about capping things. Percentages, maybe, like, we'll give you 80% of what your SRO normally gets paid, or whatever it is, rather than saying you get this much money, because everybody's different, everybody pays differently. And so if we get into the minutia of it today, into the specifics, then it's going to take up our whole 2 hours.
No, my intent was not to try to come to a resolution of this. I wanted to raise the issue, start the discussion, get people thinking about it. One of our problems is, of course, that at least traditionally, our next meeting would be in the next cycle.
Right.
So the problem from a timing point of view is that if we're going to try to engender any kind of change in the next cycle, we'd have to do it. So I guess the question to the committee is, are you interested in meeting before the next cycle to try to give yourself and the committee some time to think about this and come back with some potential responses? Or would you rather let the next cycle go and maybe try to meet with a subcommittee of the board and see what their sense of this issue is and how they would like to approach it? Or what is the interest of the group, I guess?
This is an important change that's needed, so we should meet again. Waiting for the next cycle is just going to compound the issue.
I like the idea of getting a subcommittee of the board, though, too, to get them included in this. Because there's, you know, who knows what they're thinking?
Okay.
Until we see it at the end of the year, we don't know. We've made recommendations, and then they do what they need to do. And I'd like to get some input before we make a recommendation, and that's all we can do is make a recommendation.
So if, just as a potential resolution of this, if the chair was to forward a letter to the chair of the board saying, we've identified this issue and so on, we are interested in meeting with the subcommittee of the board prior to the next application cycle process to, brainstorm it basically, and also see what practical and political considerations are going to play out. And that way we would have the opportunity perhaps before the next cycle to, come to some determination about what action, if any, we would take. Is that are everybody comfortable with that?
I would support that.
Okay.
Does it need a motion? Probably not.
It probably would be a good idea if there was direction to the chair to forward a letter. So the chair would entertain a motion to direct the chair to forward a letter to the Board of Supervisors requesting a workshop session with a subcommittee of the board regarding this funding issue.
I so move.
I second.
Scott, sorry, point of order. Scott, you're an alternate, so you can't move.
Okay, I thought we were filling in for the sheriff and.
No, we only call on the alternates when we need a quorum, so until we need a quorum, you guys can participate in conversations, just not motion or votes. Thank you.
I fill his motion and move that we request the Board of Supervisors form an ad hoc committee or whatever's appropriate.
Okay.
I second.
Any discussion?
My suggestion, just from a staffing standpoint, is that if your chair were going to draft that letter, to get it to us maybe in the next week if you could, and we could submit that letter to the board when we come to them for approval on the contracts and to discuss carry forwards and things of that sort, so that we can address all of these at one time. And then our staff will let your committee know when that item will be coming to the board, so that your committee can attend that meeting if you so chose, and provide feedback to the board at that time as well.
Okay.
And it would be in the form of asking the board to accept the letter and to decide if creating such a subcommittee or ad hoc committee, or what was most appropriate for them, was in order.
Okay. Any public comment on the discussion?
I have another kind of question regarding the
Excuse me,
process for upcoming.
Captain had a public comment.
Oh.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and Councilor members. I just want to clarify a few things for you guys going to a conversation in an ad hoc type committee where we may not have the ability to be there or share insight. Why EPD was less than Fortuna? Ours are not requesting fully funded positions. We're paying for training, we're paying for equipment, we're paying for all that stuff out of our general budget, versus others who are possibly taking all that, including retirement and everything, into account. So I agree, in essence, with some type of cap so that that money can be shared across the board a little better for all agencies at a more equitable stance. Why Eureka? Eureka's funding versus Fortuna and the size of the cities, that's really irrelevant, I believe, because we have a higher population, we need more officers. So, but we still have a tax-based budget that we have to rely on, and we are facing, just as the county is, tax-based issues that could affect our budgets and potential cuts in the near future. So the issues that each agency's face within their jurisdiction is the same. The size of the agency and the ability to fund those still comes from the taxes that are paid and done within those city jurisdictions. The city does pay a large portion of the tax base, or the large portion of the tax base does come from the city of Eureka for Measure Z funding. So I would ask, if you're going to look at positions for the law enforcement agencies outside of the secured funds or guaranteed funds for the county that's already been adjusted for them, I would ask you to look at their funding too, and how they're funding their positions and at what rate that is. So if you're going to look at a cap for police officer positions, SROs, I would ask you to try to at least evaluate that cap for correctional officers, probation officers, sheriff's deputies, or whatever those positions would be too. So from just an outside point looking in, just to keep it fair and equitable across the board, and trying to stay in the alignment with what Measure Z was meant for. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. At least, I'm not sure who to direct my comments to staff. To his point of transparency and so on, are these workshop sessions, were they to occur open to the public?
It depends on the format of it, but most likely, no.
Okay.
He had a comment.
I had one other question. One other question regarding process for next year. How set in stone is the application date? Is there any way to get more time to evaluate applications if we're going to be diving into them deeper regarding position funding and capping and getting more specific about how each individual application is funded rather than working through just based on a priority scale?
So if I might jump in, actually, the next item on the agenda is the application process and
Okay.
timeline, and so we can discuss that. Typically, if you don't mind me jumping
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, that's okay. That typically they have gone out on the 20th, but if you want it to go out sooner, we just couldn't start the process later. But if you did want to provide more time for discussion, we would just need to bump up when that happens, so we could get that application out sooner.
Would there be any more interest on the committee to have more time to review applications?
Yeah, it strikes me that there's two options. One is the general application process could be noticed and circulated through your PIO and the other normal channels and so on, with I'll call it a caveat that applicants should be aware that the committee is, and the board are going to be addressing possible changes to the formatting prior to the January application period. We encourage you to, develop your resource information and so on for preparing your application, but be aware that there may be, tinkering or tuning that goes on before that January receipt date and so on. That way that applicants can do all their homework, develop whatever information or background resource material they feel is appropriate for their application. But they would be notified that, it would be public warning essentially that you might want to consider whether this application should be submitted if in fact it was only funded 80%, could you fund the other 20? I mean, it's just real world,
Yeah.
items and so on. Rich?
I think a couple years ago, to address the captain's discussion, I think a couple years ago, this committee had a discussion and decided that just because the city of Eureka collects so much more tax than the city of Garberville, we didn't proportionally allocate more money to Eureka than Garberville. And I think that was discussed a couple of years ago. And so I think it's a county, the money goes into the pot for the county. And if I understood what the captain was discussing, because the city gets more revenue, they shouldn't have more, they shouldn't receive more.
Yeah, that is largely a political decision to be made by the Board of Supervisors. I think as much as I like making decisions and having them be final, I recognize the fact that we are advisory, and we do, I'll say, a more technical analysis. Clearly, I think everybody in the room knows that the city of Eureka was unhappy with the allocation generally a couple of years ago. And because of the personalities and appointments to the committee and so on, there were some drumbeats to try to go to a system where it was allocated based on the supposed generation, of the money and so on. Not at our level, but at the Board of Supervisors level, that didn't really gain any traction, which is not to say it had merit or didn't have merit. I'm just pointing out that that's kind of a political level discussion, probably not within our purview in my mind. Okay, we have a motion to have the chair direct a letter to the board requesting a workshop session to discuss this matter. Hopefully, there's no timeline established, but we would probably request sooner rather than later, just trying to meet the application cycle. Is that correct? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
Did you take public comment?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right. So I will direct such a letter. I'll try to get it in fact, I will get it generated tomorrow, so you can have it along the timeline that you suggested.
That would be great. And after the meeting today, staff will send out to you the position allocations for all of the Measure Z budgets.
And one thing I did want to add about that is the salary schedules that we emailed did not have totals for each year, but we did go back and add those into your packet that you have before you today. And so that is a much more clear breakdown of every year how those positions have grown or shifted for both internal county positions and the outside agencies as well. So, so that I think answers part of your question that you had. So I just wanted to let you know. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Moving on. Item number 5 is review option to set aside funds for a microgrant program. Let me talk,
Number 4, Chair.
We missed the number.
Reviewing the fiscal year 2021.
I apologize for my lack of vision without my glasses.
That's okay.
Review the fiscal year 2021 application and recommendation process and consider any process changes needed. Included in your packet is a draft application. Anybody have any commentary, thoughts on that particular?
Mr. Chair, a question to the group here. What questions did the committee members feel were not answered very well in general?
What was your comment?
What question? 'Cause basically, the 8 questions we have in front of us are what were asked last year. So I'm curious to know what question or questions were not answered very well by applicants last year. So if I might answer for myself, to me, that would be, I felt question number 4. Very few applicants really took this question and explored what's going on. And maybe they couldn't, there's always a possibility there, but what I'm getting at here is these questions aren't weighted all equally. In fact, they're probably weighted depending on our own experiences and biases. And I'm just trying to figure out if there are certain questions that have more value than others to the board, or, to the committee. And, what questions are really important here to get good, solid answers to help you evaluate each application on its own merits.
Okay. Any responses from committee members?
So I totally agree with you that number 4, Glenn and I were on the original application process. And I think we kind of knew in our hearts that at some point there wasn't going to be money for everybody. And so we put that question in there. And like with any grant, they ask you, how are you going to sustain yourself if this money ends? Because you don't want to get something going and like you don't want to fire people. That's that personnel issue again. But I think that people just shine over it. They just kind of make some lame comment generally. Some agencies are really good and they say, well, we're in the process of building this new, piece of our program and we hope to not even need your money and, or whatever. And to me, that means a lot because it means they've thought about that this is not supposed to be forever. We would like it to be forever, but it may not be forever. So to me, number 4 has always been poorly answered, not by everybody, but by a lot of people. And I think, for me, when we put that on there, we were hoping to have them generate that thought process with their group. Okay, well, wait a minute, if we get this and it doesn't last, then what are we going to do? So I would like it to be more of, even if they don't answer it the way I would like to see it, I would like it to be something that they're going to think about and talk about, but I'm not even sure that happens. A lot of people say, well, if you don't fund us, then we have to go out of business, or if we don't get this money, then we're done, and that's hard to hear, but it's also, like, I would like to see a little bit more effort put into, that's why I like the micro grant part of it, but I'm just saying that, to me, I agree with you, number 4 is pretty weakly answered.
Other comments?
I think it also, number 4 is really important, but also for me, it's number 6. How will you leverage this to additional contributions? And the reason I went to that one was, I don't see the reality of 100% funding for any application in our near future. So being aware of how to leverage an application or any allocated funds to fulfilling your application's goal is pivotal. So that it's not just us funding this. It's an opportunity for them to get funding from multiple sources and to develop other outlets so that in the future, if it's a successful program, they're not asking us for funding. And that's why I went for number 6.
Any other comments?
I have one more comment. Sorry to blab on. Okay, so regarding number 6, when we give people money, if you use some of that money to leverage toward a grant or to expand, what you're doing, that has to pretty much be stated in the application that we're going to give you, I'm just going to throw out $50,000, but 20,000 is going to be used to leverage for a grant. Then that has to be in the application, which then kind of compromises their application. So I think that question, if I had a choice, would be changed a little bit, because you can't ask them to use that money to leverage for more money if it's not in their original grant.
Okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I don't have the experience as far as working through the grant process.
Right.
I just, how do you, I have more experience, how do you prove you're credible and develop a program?
I understand that, but I think anything we give people, they use. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't use all their money, for sure. But they don't, it'd be like the fire department saying, well, okay, you gave us $1 million, but we're gonna take 20,000 of it and we're gonna apply for a grant for a new truck. Well, that would have to be in your application, that's what you were gonna put the money for, right? Because they're very specific when they give us their budget. And unless we have the micro grant stuff or something, we'd have to maybe rethink the way people are asking for the money. If we ask them, how are you gonna do that? And then they go, well, I don't know. That's not part of our deal, so.
Well, I think that's important, though, if we're moving forward with an understanding that we can't 100% fund these applications. There's going to have to be makeup somewhere.
Right.
And so maybe rewording that or reworking that might be to the best interest.
I think if we're going to change the process, or at least recommend that we would have to revisit these application questions again, because at least what I would like to see would change dramatically a lot of these questions. One thing that I don't see is, how does your application meet the intent of Measure Z? Well, any other grant that you apply for, you have to provide the reasons why you're eligible or why it's relevant for the community or for the application. In this case, that's not provided. We have to treat that out and then make a value judgment based on our interpretation, our purview.
Well, it does say under proposal narrative, please give a brief description of your request and please explain how it's an essential service for public safety, which is the Measure Z, that's what Measure Z is about. And
Oh, you're right, my mistake, that's in the attachments. I will say that
maybe it should be a question too.
having helped write some of these proposals before, that's almost redundant to question 3. But yeah, it's not worth changing. I just think that if we want to make this work better, that we're going to have to change
Clarify.
the technical part of this in the future.
Well, maybe we could just add that part about Measure Z under number 3, and how does your agency, fit under essential services? Can we change the application?
Oh, absolutely.
Do we need to recommend?
We would need a motion and a second, and agreement by the committee.
Why don't you make that motion?
I make a motion that we table our recommended changes to the application until we hopefully meet with the supervisors
Okay.
subcommittee.
All right. I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to table the discussion until the presumed joint session.
Before doing that, I just wanted to point out that there will not be another meeting before January beyond that discussion. So will there be an opportunity? The first opportunity to adjust the application process would be for a year from now. Is that something?
Well,
We could schedule an additional meeting. The problem is, we would need to establish that today, unless we called in an emergency meeting down the line. But, and I don't know when we'll be going to the board at this point in time with this letter, although I would anticipate it will hopefully be in October, and what the outcome of the board's decision would be if they want to engage an ad hoc committee, or how they would propose to respond to your letter.
Historically, when has staff circulated the application to the potential applicants?
We tend to release it in January, so the intention was to release it approximately January 20th, and that is part of today's discussion to gain your board's approval to, or your committee's approval to do that. Last year, what your committee did was made the changes at this meeting and directed staff to release it prior to your next meeting. And then the next meeting takes place in late January, and that's primarily to evaluate the mid-year projections, how that's looking, what the new year's gonna look like, and then you begin meeting in March to
Yeah.
evaluate contracts. So all of this timing is definitely very sensitive. Staff plays a role in that, and we have to be cognizant of how our staff can support you. So the meeting in January, for instance, is at a point in time when we have a solid bearing on how the first half of the year has gone, and allows for us to provide your board with, or your committee with, a lot of direction of how the new year is going to look. So today's meeting is going to work all of that out with the next item where we discuss the meeting schedule. But I'm hearing a lot of kind of balls up in the air.
I can envision,
Difficult.
assuming the motion passes, which I suspect that it will, I could see a situation where the letter would go to you tomorrow. You would bring it with the rest of your packet relative to this material to the board sometime in October. If the joint meeting could occur in November, if in fact that discussion produced decisions that would result in a necessary change in the application, we could have a short meeting in later November, early December to actually enact those changes and still make your January timeline, correct?
Potentially, yes. But now your committee will likely need to call an emergency meeting to, or a special meeting to determine which of your committee are going to participate in that interaction with the board, if the board were to agree with moving forward with that proposal.
In your mind, the whole committee would not meet with the board?
The whole committee could meet with the board.
I don't know, that would be my preference, I would think. I'd like to see as wide a level of input as possible. I think would be in everybody's interest.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there any public comment on this general thread of discussion?
On the motion.
Hi, Justin McDonald, the Fire Chiefs Association president. Just one question when you were talking about the questions on the applications. I think our group is kind of unique where we're representing upwards of 40 different agencies, and you're asking about grant matching and what are you doing to secure funding for the future. If it's weighted or if that's scored differently, then it would possibly force our application to break up into many different groups, which is probably not recommended. Ideally, we try to keep together and be one united voice. So just as food for thought when you're discussing these questions, our application may not actually be applicable to some of those questions because we're trying to represent small agencies that aren't even, they're just doing fundraisers to get their budget. So just food for thought on that.
Thank you. Any other comment?
I have a comment. I don't think, in being on the committee since it started, that there's any one question that ever gets weighted. I know you use that word weighted. We don't have like you've been to the meetings, we don't have like, you get a 10 or you get an 8. I just think that yours is unique. There's a couple other that are unique, and I think that we would certainly take, that would make sense to us. It's the smaller areas that are, that we want to know what's going to happen to them before we, offer them money, or advise the board. So I take what you said seriously, but I don't think there's any one question that's ever weighted more than another. We've never done that.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion to request a joint meeting with the Board of Supervisors. All those in favor?
For all of us, with all of us.
That would be my intention, yeah.
You've already approved that motion and voted on it.
We've
Chair.
already voted on that.
I guess I can't blame my glasses then.
Now you're tabling, you're motioning to table the review of the application.
Thank you for the clarification. The motion is to table further discussion of amending the application until after the potential meeting with the Board of Supervisors. All those in favor? It'll
don't know.
depend on the board's schedule, I would assume, and who they appoint.
And what they decide.
Yeah.
They may say no.
Maybe, they could say no, yeah.
They might say, committee, please take care of this,
Handle it.
handle it, and then come back with a recommendation. They,
Well,
yeah.
that's okay. That'll be a message in and of itself.
Yeah, that would be
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, now, my glasses and my limited memory makes me believe we're going to talk about number 5. Just by way of background information, in May, after we had completed our process, Supervisor Wilson approached me and asked for a short meeting. He had a concept that he wanted to discuss, and he was interested in having me introduce a topic to the committee for consideration. I've termed it microgrants, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but essentially his concept was, along the lines of what Ms. Campbell was indicating earlier, there are probably a segment of the community and so on that doesn't go through our normal application process because their needs either, number one, aren't timely, or number two, they don't feel that they're competitive in the sense of, the overall process. And his concept was that the committee would set aside a specific dollar amount, and just as an example, he said initially $100,000, just to kind of try to characterize it. And the concept was that that $100,000 would be reserved for what we're calling microgrants, something, say, less than $7,500, that a community organization could come forward and say, we meet the intent of the measure, and we would like to ask the committee to support a low-level allocation like that to enable us to do any one of a number of things in the community. His concept was, again, that would diversify the applicant pool to some degree. He was very favorably impressed with the belief, at least, that it would take on the leveraging and so on that Nicholas was talking about. So I told him I would agendize it, and here it is. So I guess the question before you today is, do you want to engage in this kind of conversation? Are you interested in establishing such a program? There's a couple of procedural issues. It's likely that these would not meet the normal timing cycle of I'll call them the major grant program. So you would have to develop some sort of administrative process whereby they would be considered and awarded. That could be potentially a subcommittee of this committee would be assigned to, review the microgrants with staff representation, and then make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors as one mechanism. There are others as well. So there isn't a specific proposal on the table today. The general question is, do you support the concept, and would you like us to try to come to some decision about allocating money to a very specific limited program for small applicants?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Wilson approached me also on that same subject. I don't understand why he wants to set aside $100,000 or some money when, if a person or a group wants to come before us and request $5,000, $7,500, we would accept them just like that. We would weigh the merits of them. We don't have to have separate money set aside just for small amounts of money.
I understand your point. Again, I feel uncomfortable representing him, and I asked him and notified him in the meeting. Unfortunately, he's out of the area at a Coastal Commission meeting, so he wasn't able to come and speak. One of the elements that they talked about in our conversation was the timing issue, and it was his feeling that there are these types of entities and these types of situations that develop throughout the calendar year that don't set themselves well with our annual process and so on. So one component of his suggestion to me was that these applications could be continuously accepted throughout the year if an entity became aware of, say, a specific grant opportunity where they needed matching money or something, and not be stuck in the annual single cycle process. So I'm not championing that idea, but I know that was one of his considerations.
Right. We had that discussion on email also, but you have to have a cutoff time. We can't go all, have this 100,000, I just keep referring to $100,000, going around 12 months a year. We have to have a decision by the end of our meetings, I think. Otherwise, who's going to decide that you get the money?
Well, again, like I said, I'm uncomfortable paraphrasing,
I
but
understand.
the suggestion he made was that he thought the operational mechanism, if you will, would be that the committee would appoint some subcommittee, okay? That subcommittee and a representative of the staff would meet upon the occasion of submission of such a, proposal, evaluate it and so on, and then that subgroup of this committee would make a recommendation to the board, because the board's the ultimate decider. He thought that was a more nimble process, and his concern was that it would get away from the timing limitations that we have with our current process.
For this discussion, I would just like to go on the record as saying, I don't agree with that.
Okay. Other discussion?
Did you have something you want to say?
I don't agree with what Mr. Supervisor Wilson is suggesting.
Okay.
This kind of parallels something that I've been trying to tackle, is addressing the diversity and size of our county and the priorities of the different communities. We have a huge county with a lot of different challenges in different areas. And I'm trying to think of a way that we can set aside a small amount of money that can be either delegated by districts or delegated by individual committee members for grants or for applications that fit the measure, to promote buy-in from the community, so that there's access, so that small groups within each district have access or voice that they can take advantage of. And I don't know if this is the type of thing that would allow that.
I cannot support the micro grant with the perils we have with just meeting the intent that I see for essential services. It's almost ironic that it parallels our previous discussion of apportioning the Measure Z before we even get any of the funding. If that's where we want to go, then it seems relatively simple to say, 8 million for law enforcement, 3 for fire, and 1 for roads, and the remainder can be discretionary, so to speak. But I think in the situation we're in, that's difficult to support. I certainly think that having that option is great, and it definitely supports diversifying the return. But if I look at the intent and the struggle that we're talking about, and the struggle we had this past spring and the struggles we may have next spring, taking more money away from it is going to compound the issue that we have no idea right now even how to solve. So I can't support that.
Other committee members, options, comments?
Just a comment, maybe the committee would want to add a question to the application, whereas the applicant can indicate that the funding is for seed funds. The funding they're seeking is for seed funds. And what I mean by that is they're, in a sense, using, I hope I'm getting my interpretation of what you meant by seed funds right, Ginger. Please correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically a small organization that needs a little bit of money to get kick-started into basically a more productive organization. So something where it's just a few friends or community members meeting, and the seed funds would actually help them to organize into a 501c3 or into a more formal organization, or seed funding to, in a sense, help them to obtain a grant for additional funding to provide services by which the group was established. Is that what you meant? Is that what you meant by, okay.
Other comments from committee members?
I have a comment. I just think it's interesting that the supervisor spoke to two of you individually about something we are deliberating on how to present before the supervisors. Be nice to have a more flexible mechanism to communicate.
I'd like to agree.
Okay. Okay, well, I do not see any motion to move forward with the concept at this point in time. So I would say that at this point in time, the committee is not interested in entertaining the proposal. We have a 2021 meeting schedule. Caught yourself, didn't you?
So, as we mentioned before, the staff would like to propose a meeting schedule similar to what we've done in the past, where we review mid-year totals on January 30th. An application review meetings go on in March. So following the same schedule as last year, that would be Thursdays from 2 to 4, March 5th, 12th, 19th, and 26th. And then a year-end meeting about this time on September 10th. That is up to you to discuss and decide on, but that's. what we-
Pleasure of the committee.
If I could interject as staff really quickly. I hear a lot of potential changes taking place, and so I have two concerns with time. A, the time of your committee. We value the time that you contribute to this process, and it is very cumbersome on your service to the community to sit on this committee, and our staff is sensitive to that, and I just want your committee to be cognizant of the decisions that you make in this schedule of what commitment levels that's going to have on your committee. And we do have also 3 participants who aren't even here to weigh in on the level of commitment that they want to offer. Past committees have wanted to try to really streamline this process, and we've gone through a number of years of developing this process in order to be cognizant of that. In addition, I would ask that you be cognizant of our staff's time that would be required to support your committee. We are a small staff, and we are here to serve you, and we will happily do so. But I hear a couple subcommittees coming about, and maybe more meetings taking place. So I would just encourage your committee to really try to evaluate the process and determine what's necessary and what your committee is willing to devote your service to as well.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, then just procedurally, trying to understand the communication options. My assumption is our committee chair could have a conversation with a board representative or make a presentation to the committee. But I do understand the cumbersome nature of enacting any changes, especially to this measure. The process, from my perspective, isn't necessarily what we want to change. It's except for the allocation eligibility. But the awarding, which would be at the end of the process, would be what we're really wanting to change. And that's the limitation that is the supervisor's discretion, not ours. But I think our due diligence and the experience, at least in the last year, is to say, this is the problem, here's potential solutions. But you're right, reacting and putting that into place in 2 months is unfeasible, I think. So I would look to you then through the chair, to make a better option of how to communicate our concerns and the needed changes beyond forming a subcommittee, et cetera.
Well, your committee is always welcome to come to public comment at any board meeting during non-agendized items and make public comment to the board concerning this subject. In addition, staff will always keep you aware of any Measure Z related items that are coming to the board. For instance, in October, when we will present the contracts and address some other Measure Z related things with the board. That is also an excellent opportunity for your committee to come and communicate with the board. Each district representative should be in close communication with their district supervisor and talking with them about what's transpiring in your time on the committee. And that's why there is a district representative, so that you can have those communications with them and be letting them know the conversations that you're having, and you can bring those conversations back to the committee as a whole. So that's my immediate thoughts on that. And there is flexibility in that. Again, if we need to address specific things, we can add it to this agenda item that we're going to bring in October, such as the letter that your committee plans to submit to the board. But a bit of unclarity around that is that we don't know what the board's action is going to be at that time. So then what does your committee's follow-up need to be following that board meeting and whatever the board decides to do with your letter?
I agree at this point, it's an unknown. Ernie?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. We've all agreed that we need to change the wording in the application. I'm thinking there might be a simpler way. I agree that we need to have them consider how this meets Measure Z. But if we had a cover letter that said, make sure your application, and leave it all the same, we wouldn't have to change the same thing. We wouldn't have to have ad hoc committee meetings. We could put it in the cover letter, make sure that it agrees with the Measure Z standards. And it's our job to make sure that it agrees with Measure Z standards. That's what we're doing here. And I don't think we need to, in second thought, I know I voted for it, but I think in second thought, we could bypass the ad hoc committees and the complications and just do it in a business-like manner. Put it in the cover of the letter that says, make sure it meets Measure Z. And we make sure of that in this committee. And we would leave the application as is.
Okay.
Would you like me to make a motion? Or we have to start over?
No, you're always welcome to make a motion, just to make sure that the chair doesn't get stuck in the middle of this. The motion that was previously passed was to table the discussion pending the potentiality of this meeting with some subcommittee of the board.
Yeah.
But as I heard your comments were directed more toward the application wordsmithing and so on. Did I misunderstand your intent?
Well, I'm thinking that this application, if we have to meet with the board ad hoc committee to change the wording in the application, can we just put it in a cover letter and be?
The chair's sense, and this is just my view, is that the meeting with the board was not focused, in fact, on the application changes. The meeting with the board was focused on the financial difficulties and limitations that might or might not be
Yeah, well,
opposed.
that was-
Now, those changes might result in modifications to the applications if some consensus was reached. So to me, there's kind of a subtle difference between the two in the sense that I agree with you that a clear cover letter can reinforce the concept that they need to consider how applicable their application is to the intent of the process. To me, that's a different discussion than the financial aspects, which were the subject of previous motion.
If I may, I move that we now reconsider.
If you wanted to reconsider the tabling of the application, then we would need a motion to revive.
To reconsider, yeah. Is there such a motion?
I don't think we're questioning or reconsidering the tabling. I think we're reconsidering the ad hoc committee letter, is what I'm hearing.
Okay.
But that said, I still have significant concerns that if we just continue and we go before the board and through the chair or any of us say, these are our concerns that need to be addressed, there's no mechanism for actual change. Well, I guess saying that out loud, I recognize the irony that there still isn't because we're just recommending something. All right, I'll stop talking now.
Okay. So the chair understands the intent and so on. If the intent is to overturn the previous motion, then there needs to be a motion to reconsider. And is there such a motion, I guess is my question.
I'd make the motion.
Okay, could you be motion to
What'd I say?
reconsider our decision to seek a
Yes,
meeting with the Board of Supervisors Subcommittee? Is that a fair characterization of your?
yes.
Okay, so we have a motion. Is there a second?
What is your motion?
I made a motion that we table the discussion with the Board of Supervisors. Or we,
Reconsider the need to send.
Reconsider the
We
need.
had moved to seek a meeting with the Board of Supervisors to discuss the financial concern.
Right.
Ernie's motion would potentially, if it passed, negate that action and say we will not seek a meeting with the Board of Supervisors to discuss the financial aspect.
part of the reason, if we ended discussion now, part of the reason we're not all here, for one thing, we don't know what the other people can do and can't do, the other members.
Comments?
I think it's workable the way it is. It's worked in the past, and
So we have a motion. Did you second or did you not?
I did not.
You did not.
This is called a committee circle of death, right?
Okay, so we have a motion to reconsider the request of the Board of Supervisors for a subcommittee meeting. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Great, then we can
Okay.
discuss it. All right.
We have a motion and a second to reconsider our previous action to seek a meeting with a subcommittee of the board to discuss certain financial aspects of our process. Discussion.
Again, speaking out loud, where I'm going to discover what I really want to say. I think we should draft a letter communicating our concerns, understanding the procedure of the benefit of an ad hoc committee is the cumbersome part. And if we form that, and that's based on the Board of Supervisors' discretion, the timeline doesn't seem like it will get us to a position where we can effect the change we're looking for, which is why I'm personally now struggling with whether that's a good idea or not.
Okay, other comments?
I would like to move forward with the letter talking with, addressing the Board of Supervisors. Because even if it doesn't come to any action this calendar year, it lays the groundwork for changes in the future. And for me, it's that ability to have transparency and that ability to, for us, allocate the funding the best we can with the best information we can. And I really feel that we need to bring this issue up with the Board of Supervisors and get direction from them about how to proceed.
Other comments from the committee? Anybody in the public like to speak to this issue? Okay, we have a motion and a second to reconsider our previous action to request a meeting with a subcommittee of the Board of Supervisors to discuss certain financial aspects of the process. All those in favor of the motion to reconsider, please raise your hand. Opposed? Okay, the motion fails. Motion for reconsideration fails, so the original motion will stand, and I will author the letter that was previously discussed. Next item is, I talked to staff a little bit, and one of the things I noted, having been an alternate myself on the committee, is that we had never established any procedure to determine which of the alternate members would be the voting member in that case where we did not have a quorum. So I thought it would be best just to formalize
Chair?
that process.
We haven't finalized the schedule yet. You all diverted a little to readdress that item, but we're still on the determination of the schedule for next year.
Perhaps I need a
Are we not?
caretaker. And I just don't recognize it.
This is why we're here to support you.
Thank
What
you.
were the dates that you said?
The proposed schedule would be to meet on January 30th to cover the mid-year budget totals. And then having application review in March, per the typical schedule, that would be March 5th, 12th,
Like,
19th.
5?
The 5th, March 12th, the 19th, and the 26th. That would be every Thursday in March from 2 to 4 here. So it just mirrors the schedule that we followed in previous years. And then a final meeting in September.
I would like to
September
go over March again, 5, 12, 19, 26.
Yes.
Thank you.
Discussion from committee members?
Mr. Chair, I like Thursdays starting at 2 o'clock.
Okay. Is there a motion to accept the staff's proposed schedule for 2021?
I move we accept the staff's proposal.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, we have a motion, and a second. Any further discussion? Public comment? Okay, all those in favor of accepting the proposed schedule for the 2021 process, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
Although we just passed it, I would like to talk about the starting time because of our alternates live in Shelter Cove. Could we start at 1 o'clock because you could get home earlier?
To staff, is there any availability issue with,
Asking, could we have the room and stuff like that at 1 o'clock?
No, this no availability issue for this room. The only sometimes cumbersome aspect we hit is during the March review, if your committee needs to go over, then we may butt right up to the planning commission meetings. And so that does propose a stern end time. I think that's like the third Thursday, if I recollect.
yeah, there was such a circumstance last year, I know.
Exactly, yeah. So starting at 1 would help to alleviate that, and that works fine for our staff if your committee.
Yeah, I think, Garberville and Shelter Cove, if we started at 1, it would make it easier to get home in the dark.
Okay.
Appreciate that, Rich.
Any other conversation? So would you like to put that in the form of a
Is
motion?
that a motion?
It would need to be if we'd like to take it.
Okay. No, I move that all meetings or just the March meeting?
I'm not sure what your intent is.
I move that January 30th and all meetings in March start at 1 o'clock.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any discussion? Public comment about altering our meeting time? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
Just thinking of you, that's all I've got.
No, that's okay.
I'm getting a pointy finger, which means something's coming.
Well, your committee tabled the applications. I'm trying to work this out in my head, how, if it's best for your committee to maybe schedule something right now for December, at which point in time we will have known what's the board's decision is on meeting with your committee and potentially already had an opportunity to conduct that meeting. But we do need for your committee to finalize the applications prior to your January 30th meeting. So there is that loose end that will need to be tied up
Okay.
one way or another.
So what's the pleasure of the committee in reference to a potential December meeting?
Let's just find a date.
So the Thursdays are the best day of the week, I believe?
Is there potential that we could do it before Thanksgiving? Could it be potentially November 21st?
I will not be here, but I am trying to release control. So the immediate heartburn that takes place, I will have to let go of, I think, but I will not be here. And even when I do release control, I will be like right here. So
But you'll
my
be,
preference would be that I can be available for my staff as they are still in the learning process.
Was there something about the 21st particularly, or?
I asked about that because as we move into the holiday season, things get much more complicated
Okay.
to get everybody together. And so I was hoping to address this before Thanksgiving.
Staff is suggesting the 14th. My only concern with that would be is if the board would like to meet with your committee, can we get that in from the time they determine that in October to that? It's difficult scheduling with this proposed meeting with the board, to
Would-
know how that's
Would
gonna.
the 12th of December work for staff?
Yes.
Would the 12th of December work for committee members?
Yes.
Okay, so I would think that the chair can set the meeting date without any motion, is that correct?
We would need a motion to.
Okay, you would need a motion. Is there a motion to set a December 12th meeting to discuss any potential final modifications to the application process for 2021?
At what time?
1 o'clock?
But I didn't include December in my motion, so
No, I'm just, I added
It's
it,
a separate motion.
yeah.
I so move.
Is there a second?
second.
Discussion? Members of the public like to comment?
Who was the second? Ernie?
Chief Robertson?
Rich.
Oh, wait, a second and a third then, I guess.
That's it. Ernie. I mean, Rich.
Rich
Give him the.
made the motion and, okay. All those in favor of setting a meeting date of December 12th at 1 o'clock for application potential review, please raise your hands. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
And our staff will be in contact with the outcome of your letter being submitted to the board, and we will let you know when that meeting takes place, and I would encourage your committee to participate in that item.
Okay, with permission of staff, I'm going to move to number
I
7.
think we need public comment on that motion.
I thought I did. Now, I'm going to pretty strongly claim I asked for,
We're good? Okay.
yeah,
Okay, good.
because I can't stand 3 corrections in one meeting. I just,
You're good.
okay, moving to number 7, establishing a protocol for alternate member voting procedures. This is just a housekeeping matter. We have never, to my knowledge and to staff's knowledge, established a mechanism by which we would decide which of the alternatives would take a voting position if, in fact, a quorum were not in place with the regular members. So my suggestion is that we establish a procedure whereby just a random process, probably let the chair pick a number between 1 and 10 on a silent mechanism, and then ask the 2 alternates to choose a number, and that individual would be the voting member of that meeting. And then if there were subsequent opportunities, then the other member would be the automatic voting member in that circumstance. So their voting opportunities would alternate back and forth. The choice of the first one would be simply a randomization process.
I would discourage you from the alternating just because we've never had to use it. And if it happens every 3rd year, are we going to remember which member it was the prior year? It might be totally different members, just a mechanism for each meeting where we might need an alternate to, flip a coin or.
Yeah. I appreciate the staff's concern, having sat there for 4 years, not, being able to participate but not vote. It would be unfortunate if the opportunity wasn't extended to all members, and I think we could develop a mechanism to remember who it was. I don't think that's a serious impediment. So I appreciate the staff's concern. I guess I would just have a different view.
What
So-
was the intent of having alternates?
Well, the alternates were, if the appointed members couldn't make a quorum, then the alternates fill that position to bring the committee to a quorum.
And you're just looking for a process of which alternate?
Yes.
Understood.
So I'm just suggesting a random draw process initially and then alternating thereafter.
Yeah, it sounds complicated.
You're a chief officer of a 50-person fire department and you can't count to 2?
This isn't about
Coin
me
flip?
time.
I mean, we have 2 alternates. I mean, coin flip.
Yeah. No, but once somebody gets chosen, then.
I think flipping a coin to be the first one is easier than numbers.
Okay, okay,
Flip a coin, we want a coin flip now.
okay. So there seems to be support for the monetary option. Do we need a formal motion to adopt this as a procedure? Or?
I think this is just a discussion. I don't know if we necessarily need to develop an official coin tossing procedure for your committee. So I think that's fine. And
Okay, at least for my term, the chair will adopt just a randomization process. 1 gold coin in the air and we'll let it go at that.
So
can it be
to-
silver?
I'm sorry, did you have a question?
I
So
was-
to
I was-
complicate the complicated question further, it seems strange to me that this is a representative committee, correct?
Well, there's a representative from each supervisorial district, a couple of generally appointed members, and then the alternates, so.
And our responsibility is to make value-based decisions that are then voted on.
One would hope.
So then I just struggle with how an alternate would represent your specific interests. For example, if we had to vote on something that was more beneficial to a district as opposed to an agency, which is the mix we have, and that specific person wasn't here, there's no ability to have that representation with an alternate.
I guess I'm having another moment, because in my mind, the alternates, the representation aspect of the alternates is the same as the representation of the generally appointed members. They aren't representing a specific geographic district, but they are representing a consensus of the Board of Supervisors in the same way that, you know, a generally appointed member would. I guess I just don't I don't get your point.
So I understand what you're saying, because you're representing the Fire Chiefs Association. So at the end, when we're voting, if you're not here and one of them have to vote on something in Shelter Cove or McKinleyville, then I think they're very fair people because I know them, but the potential would be there not to give as much weight to the vote because you weren't able to pick it.
And then we tally a weighted,
Right.
voted matrix.
Right,
And if that isn't possible, it just
right. But we've,
affects the process. But I do understand the intent, and
right, and we've always. had
I
people
do
there.
understand the appointed representation. And with 5 meetings, we should be able to attend every one.
Yeah, they do.
But just the situation I was in last year with jury duty and the third meeting of selections, that was, it was challenging.
Okay.
I do want to return to something that was said at the first meeting I attended. And I came very focused on trying to come at this from the 4th District and represent my community because my community needs help. But something was said that was very poignant to me, and it was, it's not a perfect process. We're not going to get this perfect, but we are going to do good. And oddly enough, that really helped me be able to move forward. Because within this committee and within this system, we've all worked together now and have an understanding of what we're trying to achieve with this. And I think that if one of our alternates was included in a vote, I don't think it would hugely skew the result. And I'd like to applaud their diligence in coming every day and being here and participating to the level that they do.
Well, plus, Sean, no, never mind.
Okay, have we exhausted the coin flip process and related matters?
We're done.
Okay. I think we would have a motion for adjournment.
If I may, before you adjourn, just make a brief announcement or discussion point of my own.
Okay.
In my zeal to get started in the 1819 and 1920 budgets, I neglected to introduce myself and everyone else up here. So I just wanted to just mention again that my name is, or for the first time maybe today, that my name is Neftali Rubio Mills, and I am sort of taking the lead or attempting to as we transition roles, but you will continue to have the 3 of us to rely on for support here with the committee. And I have another piece of news is just in terms of timing of the next meeting, I will be here in December. However, in January, I will likely be on maternity leave. And so you will still have Alicia and Fiona here to support the committee as you need. But as we've been doing, as you've seen today, we will be doing it as a team until we're able to fully transfer over to me leading. So thank you for bearing with us in this learning process and kind of timing thing we have going. So it's been a pleasure, and thank you.
It's been fun to watch the twins work. Okay, we'll adjourn the meeting, and staff will be communicating to us, as presumably upon decision of the Board of Supervisors about whether the December, 12th meeting will ultimately be necessary as a result of the meeting of the subcommittee.
Well, the December 12th meeting is definitely going to need to take place because we need an application to be able to
Okay.
release to the public.
Okay,
And I think Ernie might have a quick.
Yeah, I have a good of the order comment. We did a great deal of discussing on how to choose the alternative, and it was a coin flip. I was going to suggest drawing straws, but our quintessential politician over here pointed out that straws are illegal in California.
Thank you for
So that's
that
all I
one.
have to say.
they're probably racist too, aren't they?